The cry in the storm the night sky over the frozen planet was nothing but darkness and white blur. Snow fell in thick waves, whipped around by the screaming wind. Ice crunched under Ethan Cole's boots as he pushed forward, each step heavier than the last. His breath fogged up inside his helmet, and the warning light on his suit flashed red. Temperature critical. He had been walking for hours since his rover broke down in the middle of the storm. The map on his wrist screen showed no sign of a nearby base. He needed shelter fast, or the cold would finish him before sunrise. His fingers felt numb even through the thermal gloves. Ethan kept his eyes down, scanning for a cave or even a ridge that could block the wind. The storm was so loud that it drowned out every other sound until he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him. A faint, high-pitched noise. Not like the howl of the storm, but something. Softer, sharper. He stopped walking. The noise came again. A cry that was so faint it was almost lost in the storm, but he was sure now. It was the sound of a child crying. His mind raced. Impossible. No one would be out here in this weather. Still, something inside him refused to ignore it. He adjusted his direction and followed the sound. Boots sinking deep into the snow. The cry grew louder, mixed with a strange clicking sound. The wind stung his face, but Ethan forced himself to move faster. He climbed over a low snowdrift, and that's when he saw it. At the base of a frozen rock wall, half buried in snow, was a small figure. It wasn't human. The figure was tiny. Maybe 3 feet tall, with glowing blue skin that shimmered faintly in the dark. A thin layer of ice clung to its short hair, and its large black eyes were filled with fear. The child's body trembled violently, its small hands clutching at the snow as if trying to dig into it. Ethan's first thought was alien. His second thought was dying. He knelt down, brushing snow off the child's face. The skin was freezing, cold to the touch. Through his helmet speaker, Ethan said, "Hey. Hey, it's okay." The child looked up at him and spoke, but the words were in a language Ethan didn't understand. Soft, broken sounds that seemed to come from deep in her throat. She coughed, and a thin mist escaped her lips. Without thinking twice, Ethan opened his coat and pulled the child inside, holding her close to his chest. She was frighteningly light, as if she hadn't eaten in days. He could feel her heart racing. "We've got to get you somewhere warm," he muttered, scanning the area. That's when he noticed it, a shadow moving in the storm. It was far away, almost invisible in the snow, but he saw it, tall, dark, and moving slowly, as if it were searching for something. The child noticed it too. She froze completely, her small hands gripping Ethan's coat tightly. She whispered something again, her voice trembling. Ethan's instincts told him this was bad. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't friendly. He tightened his grip on the child and turned toward a slope he'd passed earlier. If he was lucky, it would lead to shelter. The wind seemed to grow stronger, pushing against him as he climbed. Snow filled his boots, biting into his skin. The child kept her face buried in his chest, whimpering softly. Every few steps, Ethan glanced back. The shadow was still there, now joined by another one. Both moved slowly, their shapes blurring in the storm, but Ethan could feel their attention on him. Finally, he spotted a narrow crack in the ice wall, just big enough for a person to squeeze through. With the last of his strength, he pushed inside. The wind's roar faded, replaced by a dull echo. It was a shallow cave, but it blocked the snow and the cold wind. Ethan set the child down carefully. She curled up, shivering, her glowing skin casting a faint blue light on the icy walls. Ethan pulled out his portable heating unit and switched it on. Warm air began to fill the space. The child's shivering slowed slightly, but her eyes kept darting toward the entrance. She pointed with one trembling finger and whispered again, more urgently this time. Ethan followed her gaze and froze. Just beyond the crack, in the swirling snow, two tall figures stood still, their faces hidden. Watching the cave, the child whimpered and hid her face again. Ethan's heart pounded. Whoever they were, they had found him. And they weren't going to leave without the child. The shelter Ethan didn't move for a few seconds. His breath came slow, controlled, though his heart hammered in his chest. The two tall figures stood in the storm, still as statues, their silhouettes almost blending into the white blur outside. The wind howled around them, but they didn't flinch. He glanced down at the small alien child. Her big, dark eyes were wide with terror, and she kept whispering something over and over, almost like a warning. He couldn't understand her words, but the fear in her voice was enough. Ethan knelt beside her. "Stay here," he said softly, though he doubted she understood. He set her closer to the heating unit, making sure she was wrapped in his thermal blanket. Then, moving slowly, he reached for his belt and pulled out his plasma cutter, the only thing he had that could be used as a weapon. He edged closer to the cave's narrow entrance, keeping his body low. Snow whipped past outside, blinding. In the dark, the figures were still there. But now, they were gone. Ethan blinked hard. The space outside was empty. No shadows, no movement. It's the endless wall of falling snow. He stepped back, uneasy. His instincts screamed that they hadn't left. They were hiding, watching, waiting behind him. The child made a small sound, almost like a sob. Ethan turned quickly. She was pointing toward the floor of the cave, her tiny fingers trembling. He followed her gaze and froze. There, just inside the entrance, glowing faintly on the ice, was a strange mark. It looked like it had been burned into the surface, a jagged symbol, unfamiliar and alien. The edges still shimmered faintly, as if whoever made it had done so moments ago. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This wasn't random. The symbol was a warning, or a claim. Whoever those figures were, they'd marked the cave. They knew exactly where he was. The child whimpered again, curling up tighter under the blanket. Ethan went to her side, crouching low so his face was level with hers. "It's okay," he said quietly, even though he wasn't sure it was. "I won't let them take you." He pulled a ration bar from his pack and broke it in half, offering it to her. She hesitated, sniffed it, then took a tiny bite. The way she chewed told him she hadn't eaten in a long time. While she ate, Ethan took the time to check his supplies. His heating unit had enough charge for maybe 12 hours. His oxygen tanks would last longer, but not by much, if he wanted. To get the child to safety, he couldn't wait out the storm here. He'd have to move before the hunters, if that's what they were, decided to come in. The child's voice broke his thoughts. She was speaking again, slow and careful this time, as if trying to make him understand. Her hands moved too, making quick, sharp gestures. Ethan frowned, trying to follow. She touched her chest, then pointed to the entrance, then pressed her palms together like she was begging. It clicked. She was telling him they would come back. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, I figured." The heating unit hummed softly, its warm air slowly melting the frost from the cave walls. Outside, the wind roared, but there was a rhythm to it now, a kind of pulse. Ethan listened carefully. It wasn't just the wind, there were other sounds buried in it. Low, guttural calls, almost like animals talking to each other. The child tensed at the noise. Pulling the blanket tighter, Ethan clenched his jaw. Staying here was no longer an option. He had to find somewhere safer, somewhere those hunters couldn't follow. He thought about the old cum station he'd passed 2 days ago. If he could reach it, he might be able to send a distress signal to any nearby patrol. It was a long shot, but better than waiting for death to walk through the cave entrance. He looked at the child again. She was fragile, exhausted, but there was something in her eyes, not just fear, but a spark of determination. "All right, kid," he said softly, adjusting the straps on his pack. "We're getting out of here, and we're going to make it." She tilted her head, not understanding the words. But when Ethan reached out his hand, she placed her small, glowing fingers. In his dot, Ethan took one last look toward the mouth of the cave. The snow was still heavy, but for a brief moment, I thought he saw movement again. A tall, thin shadow slipping between the storm's waves. He tightened his grip on the plasma cutter. They were still out there, and he had just made the choice to run straight through them. The hunters, the storm outside was a wall of white and screaming wind. But Ethan could feel eyes on him. It was the same cold pressure he'd felt in the cave, the sense of being watched. Every step out into the snow made his instincts shout louder, telling him to go back. But going back wasn't an option. He carried the child in one arm, holding her close to his chest under his thick coat. She was light to light, and her small frame shivered against him despite the heat from his body. In his other hand, he gripped the plasma cutter, its faint blue glow cutting a thin line in the snow. The world beyond the cave was nearly invisible. Flakes stung his faceplate, and the wind tried to push him back with every step. His visor displayed a faint map, but the signal was patchy, flickering every few seconds. The child's small hand clutched his coat tightly. She turned her head, glancing over his shoulder, and whispered something in that soft, strange voice of hers. Ethan didn't understand the words, but the tone was enough. She had seen something. He didn't dare look right away. Instead, he adjusted his pace, shifting direction toward a jagged ridge that might give them some cover. Only when they were half hidden behind it did he glance back. Shapes moved in the storm. 3 of them. They were tall, much taller than any human, with broad shoulders and long limbs. The snow made them blur in and out of sight, but Ethan caught glimpses of dark, armored figures with glowing lines running across their suits. Each step they took seemed deliberate, almost methodical, as if they knew exactly where he was heading. Hunters, the child made a small noose brass. The child made a small noose brass melee. The lugger made a small noose brass day and leaves a rich long-lasting claws. And live, to May side long-lasting color. Each step they took seems deliberate. All me, my spell. As it was said, I can see like my.k.lab, side IQ, my slassacad, my Liz, PAK. They were con my by caught it. By my oh it is. You always made it so alike and in a repu at epi so great cassette salai it's it blah diarrhea it get it's titly the frightened sound burying her face into his chest. Ethan whispered, "It's all right. I've got you." Even though his own heart was racing, he pushed forward, following the ridge until it dipped into a narrow passage between ice walls. Here, the wind was weaker, and the snow settled in soft drifts underfoot, but the silence was worse than the storm. Every sound he made, the crunch of his boots, the faint hiss of his suit, felt loud enough to give them away. Then he heard a deep, low click, followed by another dot not far behind. He turned his head slightly, catching movement at the mouth of the passage. One of the hunters had stopped there, its head tilting as if it were listening. Ethan froze. The child was trembling in his arms, and he could feel her tiny heartbeat pounding. The hunter stepped forward. Its armor was dark, with jagged plates that seemed almost grown rather than built. Its mask was smooth, except for 2 narrow slits that glowed faintly yellow. In its hands, it held a long, spear-like weapon, the tip buzzing faintly with energy. Ethan tightened his grip on the plasma cutter. But he knew in a straight fight, he'd lose. The child whispered something urgently, pointing toward a thin gap in the ice wall to their left. It was small, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through. But it led away from the hunter's line of sight. "Good call," he murmured and moved toward it as quietly as possible. He slipped into the gap, turning sideways to fit. The ice was cold against his shoulders, and his breath fogged the visor. Behind him, the clicking sound grew louder. Halfway through the gap, he heard a sharp, metallic noise, the spear scraping against ice. The hunter was following. Ethan didn't think. He shoved forward, stumbling into an open space on the other side. A cluster of jagged ice formations stood here, their shapes tall and twisted like frozen trees. He ducked behind one, pressing his back to it, holding the child close. The footsteps grew closer. The child's glowing skin lit faint blue under the shadows. Ethan quickly pulled the thermal blanket around her head, dimming the light. The world narrowed to the sound of the hunter's breathing, slow, steady. Mechanical dot, it stopped just a few feet away. For a moment, Ethan thought it had found them. Then, somewhere in the storm beyond, another hunter let out a long, guttural call. The one near him turned its head and answered with a short click. A pause, then it moved away, its heavy footsteps fading into the snow. Ethan exhaled slowly, only now realizing how tight his muscles had been. The child peeked up from under the blanket, her eyes still wide but with a flicker of relief. "That was too close," Ethan whispered. But he knew it wasn't over. The hunters weren't giving up. They were spreading out, trying to hurt him. Somewhere, he had to stay unpredictable, keep moving until he reached the cum station, holding the child tighter. Ethan stepped back into the storm. The shadows were gone for now, but the feeling of being hunted stayed, cold and sharp as the wind. Somewhere out there, the hunters were waiting for their chance, and he knew, sooner or later, they'd take it. The truth Ethan didn't stop moving, until his legs burned and every breath felt like ice tearing down his throat. The storm still roared, but his mind was sharper now, locked on one goal: get the child to the cum station before the hunters closed in again. He found shelter for a moment under an overhang of rock and ice. It wasn't much, but it blocked enough wind for him to catch his breath. The child was still wrapped in the blanket, her small glowing face peeking out. She was watching him closely, almost studying him. "All right," he muttered, kneeling so his visor was level with hers. "We can't keep running blind. I need to know who they are and why they're after you." She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but something in his tone made her sit up straighter. She touched her chest and said softly, "Leora." It was the first time Ethan had heard a name he could actually understand. "Leora," he repeated. She nodded. He pointed back toward the direction they had come from. "Them," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. He mimed walking fingers and then pointed at her. "Why?" She frowned, then glanced away, as if afraid to answer. Her hands moved slowly now, shaping unfamiliar signs. Ethan activated his translator device, clipping it to his collar. "Speak," he said gently. Leora's voice came soft and broken, her alien words flowing through the translator. In a strange, halting rhythm. "They took my family, burned our home, wanted me." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Why you?" She hesitated, then held out her small hands. Between her palms, a faint shimmer appeared, tiny sparks of blue light, swirling like dust in sunlight. The air between them grew colder, a thin frost spreading over her skin. Ethan stared. "You can control temperature," she nodded once. "Bloodline gift. Rare, dangerous. They want to use me, turn me into weapon." The wind howled outside, but Ethan barely heard it. He had seen plenty of cruel things in his time, but the idea of turning a child into some kind of weapon made his stomach twist. He looked into her big black eyes, saw the fear there, but also something else, a stubborn spark of defiance. He knew right then that he couldn't just drop her at the nearest station and walk away. "They're not getting you," he said. Firmly, "Not while I'm breathing." Leora blinked, studying him for a moment, then gave a tiny nod, as if she believed him. But belief wouldn't keep them alive. They needed a plan. Ethan pulled up the map on his visor. The Cum station was still several kilometers away, and the terrain between here and there was rough, deep ice trenches and open plains with no cover. The hunters would be able to track them easily if they weren't careful. He considered doubling back, taking a longer route through the frozen canyon to the east. It would add hours to the journey, but it might throw the hunters off. Before he could decide, a sound cut through the storm. Not the low clicks of the hunters, but a high-pitched, metallic screech. Leora's eyes widened in recognition. "What is it?" Ethan asked. She pointed toward the sky. Ethan followed her gaze and saw nothing at first. Then, through a gap in the storm clouds, something dark and sleek passed overhead. It wasn't large, but it moved like it was searching, scanning. A hunter craft. Ethan swore under his breath. They were tightening the net. If they didn't move now, that ship would lock onto their heat signature. He grabbed Leora's hand. Time to go. They left the overhang, moving quickly, but keeping low. Every step felt like a gamble. Push too fast and they might stumble. Move too slow and the hunters would catch up. After half an hour, the storm began to thin slightly, the snow easing into light flurries. The world ahead opened up into a wide, frozen plain. In the distance, faint against the horizon, Ethan could see the shape of the old Cum Tower tilted, half buried in ice. But still standing, Leora saw it too, her grip on his coat tightening. "Safe?" she asked in a small voice. "Maybe," he said, "if we can reach it." They started across the plain, the wind pushing at their backs now. For a moment, Ethan allowed himself to think they might make it without another fight. Then, he heard the click. It came from ahead this time. Through the light snowfall, 3 tall shapes emerged, blocking the path to the Cum Tower. The hunters had been waiting for them. Ethan's gut went cold. The one in the center stepped forward, its mask glinting under the weak light. It raised its spear, the tip crackling with energy. Beside him, Leora's small hand began to glow faintly. Under the blanket, Ethan knew what that meant. She was ready to use her gift, even though it might drain her completely. He tightened his grip on the plasma cutter. If they wanted her, they'd have to go through him first. The escape, the wind, swept across the frozen plain, pulling at Ethan's coat and sending snow swirling between him and the hunters. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. The 3 tall figures stood like dark statues, their glowing armor lines pulsing slowly, as if alive. The one in the center lowered its spear and pointed it straight at Ethan. The message was clear. Hand her over. Ethan shifted his stance, setting Leora down behind him. "Stay close," he murmured. She didn't answer, but her small, glowing hand grabbed the back of his coat tightly. The hunters began to advance, their footsteps heavy and deliberate. The sound of crunching snow under their boots carried across the plain, mixing with the distant hum of their craft circling above. Ethan's mind raced. Fighting them head-on was suicide. His plasma cutter could melt through steel, but against their armor, it might only slow them down. He needed a distraction, something to break their formation and give them a way out. His eyes flicked around. The frozen expanse, nothing but snow, ice, and there, to his left, a shallow fissure ran across the plain, a narrow crevasse hidden under a thin layer of snow. An idea formed. "Dangerous, but better than dying here. Leora?" he whispered, crouching slightly so she could hear over the wind. "Okay? When I tell you to run, you run." "That way?" He pointed toward the fissure. Don't stop until you reach the ridge on the other side." She hesitated, eyes full of worry, but nodded. The lead hunter gave a sharp click. Raising its weapon, Ethan moved first. He swung the plasma cutter in a wide arc, the blue flame hissing through the air and melting a chunk of ice in front of him. Steam exploded upward, mixing with the snow and creating a sudden whiteout. "Run," he shouted. Lyora bolted toward the fissure, her small figure barely visible through the cloud. The hunters reacted instantly. The two on the sides broke into a run to intercept her. Ethan charged forward, ramming into the center hunter before it could follow. The impact jolted through his body, but he kept moving, driving the plasma cutter into the hunter's side. Sparks flew, and the creature roared a deep mechanical growl before shoving him back with terrifying strength. He hit the ice hard, sliding several feet before coming to a stop. His ribs ached, but he saw Leora reach the fissure and leap across. The hunters chasing her didn't slow down. They didn't realize what was under the snow. The first one's foot landed on the hidden crevasse. The ice gave way with a sharp crack, and the hunter dropped out of sight, vanishing into the dark. The second managed to stop just in time, but in doing so, gave Leora enough distance to disappear into the ridge's shadows. Ethan staggered to his feet. The lead hunter turned toward him again, furious. It raised its spear and hurled it. The weapon spun through the air, crackling with energy. Ethan dove to the side, the spear missing him by inches and slamming into the ground, sending a burst of blue electricity across the ice. The distraction gave him just enough time to run. He sprinted toward the ridge, his boots slipping on the slick surface. The sound of heavy footsteps pounding behind him. Halfway there, something flashed to his right. The second hunter was moving to cut him off. Then the air changed. A sudden wave of freezing cold swept across the plain, sharper than the storm itself. Frost formed instantly along Ethan's visor, and the hunter's armor turned white with ice. The creature staggered, its movements slowing as a layer of frost locked its joints. Ethan didn't need to guess who had done it. He reached the ridge and saw Leora standing there. Her small hands glowing brightly, her breath ragged. She had used her power again, and it had drained her. She swayed on her feet, but Ethan caught her before she could fall. "You're getting way too good at saving me," he said, half smiling despite the danger. Behind them, the lead hunter roared, shaking. Off the steam and ice, they had bought seconds, maybe a minute. Not more. Ethan pulled Leora into his arms again and began climbing the ridge. The cum station was close now. He could see its tilted tower through the thinning snow. But the sound of the hunter's pursuit followed them like a shadow. They weren't out of this yet, not even close. The final stand, the cum station, loomed ahead like a skeletal ghost. Its one proud tower leaning against the wind, metal panels half buried in ice. The storm had thinned enough that Ethan could see the jagged holes in its walls, the signs of years without maintenance. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. He pushed through the last stretch of snow, carrying Leora close, glowing. Skin was dim now, the light barely visible beneath the blanket wrapped around her. She was exhausted, head resting on his shoulder, but her small fingers still clung to his coat. As they reached the station's heavy door, Ethan set her down gently. "Stay here," he said, testing the handle. It was frozen solid. He jammed the plasma cutter into the seam, the heat melting the ice until the metal groaned and gave way. The inside smelled of rust and cold. Dim emergency lights flickered, barely illuminating the long hallway. Snow had blown in through a broken window, covering the floor in a thin layer of frost. Ethan led Leora inside, shutting the door behind them. For a moment, the silence felt like safety. Then he saw it, the control panel in the center of the room, cracked open, wires hanging loose. The main power core was missing. Without it, the cum station was nothing but a frozen tomb. Damn. Ethan muttered. Kicking a piece of ice aside, Leora tugged at his sleeve, pointing toward the floor. There, beside a pile of snow, lay a set of tracks, large, heavy prints leading toward the back exit. The hunters had been here. Recently, a cold realization settled in his gut. They had taken the power core. Without it, he couldn't send a distress signal. That meant they hadn't just been chasing him, they'd planned this, forcing him. Here to trap him. The sound came then, a deep metallic thud from outside, followed by another, and another. They were here. Ethan scanned the room quickly. There were still a few old crates, some broken machinery, and the damaged cum console. It wasn't much, but he could work with it. Leora, he said, crouching. So his visor was level with her glowing eyes. You stay in that corner. No matter what happens, you don't move unless I tell you. She looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she nodded. Pressing herself against the far wall, Ethan set to work fast, rigging what was left of the mining equipment into makeshift traps. A few plasma fuel cells connected to pressure triggers, not enough to kill the hunters, but enough to slow them down. He positioned them near the doors and under the windows, then grabbed a steel pipe as a backup weapon. The first door blew inward. The hunters stepped through the smoke, two of them, armor glowing faintly under the flickering lights. They're tall. Frames filled the room, their weapons raised. Ethan ducked behind a crate, firing the plasma cutter in a quick burst. The shot hit one of the fuel cells he'd placed earlier. The explosion was small, but violent enough to send shards of ice and metal flying. One hunter staggered back, armor dented. But the other pressed forward. It swung its spear, the crackling tip barely missing Ethan's head. He countered with the steel pipe, slamming it into the creature's arm. It barely flinched, shoving him aside with brutal strength. Ethan hit the ground hard. The world spun for a moment, but he forced himself up, just in time to see the lead hunter step through the back door, carrying the stolen power core. The sight sparked something inside him. If he could get that back, they had a chance. He charged. The lead hunter turned too late. Ethan rammed the steel pipe into its chest, forcing it back a step. Leora, from across the room, saw the opening. Her small hands began to glow again. Frost creeping across the floor toward the hunter's legs. The ice locked around its joints, slowing it just enough for Ethan to grab the power core from its grasp. The moment he did, the hunter roared, snapping, free of the ice. Leora now, Ethan shouted. She unleashed everything she had, a burst of freezing air so intense that frost coated the walls, the floor, and even Ethan's visor. The hunters froze mid-step, armor creaking under the sudden ice. Ethan shoved the power core into the cum console, his fingers moving fast despite the numbness. The old machine hummed to life, lights flickering as the distress beacon began to pulse. From outside, he heard the faint whine of engines. Not the hunter's craft, but something bigger, heavier. Help was coming. The frozen hunters began to crack free of the ice, their glowing eyes locking on him. It was going to be close. The unthinkable. Cum station's ancient walls shook as the sound of approaching engines grew louder. Through a frost-covered window, Ethan caught flashes of bright searchlights cutting through the storm. The rescue team was closing in, but so were the hunters. The ice holding them had begun to crack. Sharp fractures spiderwebbing across their armor. The lead hunter's glowing eyes burned like molten gold in the dim light, its mask splitting slightly to release a hiss of hot vapor. They were breaking free, and once they did, the narrow room would become a death trap. Ethan's hands tightened around the plasma cutter. Leora, he called, glancing toward her. She was slumped against the wall, breathing hard, her small hands trembling from the cold she had unleashed. Her glow was faint, flickering, but her eyes stayed on him. "You've done enough," he said, his voice low but firm. "Let me handle this." The lead hunter shattered the last layer of ice with a roar, stepping forward with terrifying speed. The other two followed, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Ethan ducked behind the console as the first spear slammed into the metal, sending sparks across the floor. He swung out with the plasma cutter, scoring a deep burn across one hunter's arm. But the weapon was wrenched from his grip and clattered across the ice. One of them grabbed him by the chest, plate, and hurled him into the wall. His visor cracked, cold air rushing in and burning his lungs. The hunter raised its weapon for the killing strike and then froze. Not from Leora's power this time, but because of her voice. She was standing now, barely, her small frame shaking as she shouted something in her own language. The words came out like shards of ice, sharp, fierce, defiant. The lead hunter hesitated, tilting its head as if listening. Ethan used that moment to slam his boot into its knee joint. It staggered, and he lunged for the plasma cutter, slashing. Across its side, blue sparks burst out, and the hunter stumbled back, crashing into one of the crates. But the other two moved in instantly, pinning Ethan down. One gripped his arm with crushing force, the other holding its weapon to his throat. Leora's voice came again, softer this time, almost pleading. She stepped forward, holding out her small, glowing hands. Ethan realized what she was doing before she even looked at him. She was offering herself in exchange for his life. No. Ethan's voice was raw. "Don't you dare." The hunter seemed to consider the offer. One loosened its grip on Ethan slightly, ready to take her. And that was when he made the choice. The unthinkable choice. With a surge of strength, Ethan twisted free, grabbing the nearest plasma fuel cell from the floor. He slammed it into the ground between them, triggering its safety override. The device began to hiss, blowing hotter by the second. The hunters recognized the danger and stepped back, but Ethan didn't. He grabbed Leora and pulled her behind the console, shielding her with his body as the fuel cell exploded. The blast wasn't massive, but in the enclosed space, it was enough to send shards of ice and metal flying. The hunters were thrown back, their armor scorched and cracked. The sound of engines roared outside. On the station's front door burst open. Two heavily armed human rescuers stormed in, weapons blazing. The hunters, realizing the fight had turned, activated their cloaking fields and vanished into the storm. Ethan didn't relax until the last shadow disappeared into the white. The rescuers rushed over. "Cole, you all right?" One of them shouted. Ethan, still catching his breath, nodded and looked down at Leora. She was staring up at him with wide, unblinking eyes. Slowly, she reached out and touched his cracked visor, her voice trembling as she whispered one word in perfect English. "Home." The rescuers glanced at each other. "We'll take her to Central Command," one said. "They'll know what to do with her." Ethan's answer was immediate. "No." Both men looked at him in surprise. "She's not going to some lab. She's coming with me," Ethan said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "You put her in the system? Those hunters will find her again. With me, she's safe." The rescuers hesitated, then nodded. Minutes later, they were aboard the rescue craft, the storm fading into the distance. Leora sat beside Ethan, wrapped in a fresh thermal blanket, her head resting against his arm. Her glow was returning, faint, but steady. Ethan stared out the window at the endless ice below, feeling the strange weight of responsibility settle deeper in his chest. He had stepped into the storm alone. Now, he was leaving it with someone who was depending on him completely. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: he would protect her. no matter the cost. And somewhere in the blizzard far below, the hunters were already planning their return.